There are moments woven into the fabric of frontier history, when fate arrives wearing an unexpected disguise, when a simple need for shelter transforms into an encounter that will reshape destinies, and prove that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand plans, but with exhaustion and a desperate search for a place to rest weary bones. In the untamed heart of the American West, where distances between settlements stretched for days, and where a traveler's survival often depended on the kindness of strangers, or the luck of stumbling upon refuge before darkness and danger closed in, one tired rancher seeking nothing more than a barn to sleep in would find himself walking into a situation he could never have anticipated. A household of women who would see in his arrival not an inconvenience but an opportunity, not a burden but a blessing, and who would set in motion a series of events that would transform a solitary man's hardscrabble existence into something richer and more complex than he had ever imagined possible. Picture a man riding through twilight on a horse that was as exhausted as its rider, scanning the horizon for any sign of habitation, any structure that might offer shelter from the cold night descending across the plains, his expectations limited to perhaps a haystack or an empty barn where he could spread his bedroll and sleep for a few hours before continuing his journey. Now picture that man arriving at a remote homestead, where 5 women lived without a man's protection in a world where such arrangements were considered both dangerous and scandalous. Women who had learned to survive through cooperation and determination, but who understood that their situation was precarious, that they needed help they could not hire and protection they could not purchase, that Providence might be offering them a solution in the form of this stranger seeking shelter. What happened when this weary rancher knocked on their door expecting nothing more than permission to sleep in their barn would become a story told and retold across the territory, a tale of how necessity and opportunity can intertwine, how lives can change direction in a single evening, how a man seeking only rest can find himself swept into circumstances that will challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and about what kind of life he wanted to live, proving that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we never plan to take, and that sometimes the best things in life come from saying yes to situations that seem complicated and uncertain, but that offer possibilities we never knew we needed. The year was 1881, and the territory of Colorado stretched across landscapes ranging from high mountains to rolling plains, from dense forests to open grassland, offering both breathtaking beauty and brutal challenges to those who tried to make lives there. The small town of Silver Creek sat in a valley surrounded by hills, a settlement of perhaps 50 buildings serving a scattered population of ranchers and miners and homesteaders who depended on the town for supplies and services and the minimal social contact that frontier life allowed. It was toward this town that a rancher named Samuel Thomas McKenna, known to everyone as Sam, was traveling after 3 weeks spent delivering cattle to a buyer in Denver, and then conducting various errands that had kept him away from his own ranch far longer than he had intended. Sam was 34 years old, a man shaped by years of hard physical labor into someone lean and strong, with sun-weathered skin and hands that bore the calluses and scars of ranch work. He had been working his ranch alone for the past 8 years, ever since inheriting the property from an uncle who had died without other family, building the operation from a struggling operation into a modestly successful one through relentless work and careful management. Sam was not a man given to socializing or seeking company, preferring the straightforward challenges of ranching to the complications of human relationships, content with solitude in ways that made some people think him odd, but that he himself found perfectly natural and satisfying. The journey from Denver back to his ranch near Silver Creek normally took about 4 days of steady riding, but various delays and complications had stretched Sam's trip into its 6th day. And now, as evening approached, he found himself still about 20 miles from his destination, too far to reach before full darkness made travel dangerous. His horse was exhausted from the long journey, and Sam himself was tired to his bones, looking forward to nothing more than lying down somewhere and sleeping for 10 hours straight. He needed to find shelter for the night, some ranch or homestead where he could ask permission to sleep in a barn, or at least in a protected spot out of the wind that was beginning to blow cold across the plains. As twilight deepened into dusk, Sam spotted what he had been hoping to find, a cluster of buildings in the distance that indicated human habitation. He turned his horse toward these structures, riding slowly to spare his mount's remaining strength, planning in his mind how he would approach whoever lived there, would explain his situation, would ask politely for permission to shelter overnight, and would offer to pay for the privilege or to do some work in the morning as compensation. He expected to find a family or perhaps a bachelor homesteader, someone who would either grant permission or refuse it, after which he would either sleep in relative comfort or would find some natural shelter and make do as best he could. As Sam drew closer to the buildings, he could make out the layout of a small homestead, a house that looked to be of decent size and construction, a barn, a chicken coop, and various other outbuildings arranged in the practical pattern of a working farm. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home and preparing evening meals. Sam rode into the yard as the last light faded from the sky, dismounted stiffly, and walked to the house, preparing to knock and make his request. He noticed that the property seemed well maintained, but showed signs of needing work that required male strength, fences that needed mending, equipment that needed repair, the kinds of tasks that accumulated when no man was available to handle them. Sam knocked on the door and waited, hearing voices inside. Women's voices, he thought, multiple people talking. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a woman of perhaps 50 years, gray-haired and sturdy-looking, who studied Sam with careful eyes, the look of someone assessing whether a stranger represented help or threat. Sam removed his hat and introduced himself, explaining that he had been traveling for days and needed shelter for the night, that he was asking permission to sleep in the barn and would be happy to pay for the privilege or to do work in exchange for the accommodation. The woman at the door studied Sam for a long moment, her eyes taking in his worn but respectable clothing, his exhausted horse, his weathered face that suggested years of honest outdoor work rather than the smoother features of a gambler or confidence man. She introduced herself as Martha Collins and told Sam that he could indeed shelter in the barn, but that she insisted he come inside first for a hot meal, because she could see he was exhausted and hungry, and she would not send any man to sleep on an empty stomach when food was available. Sam, who had expected only permission to use the barn, was surprised by this hospitality but gratefully accepted, following Martha inside the house. What Sam encountered inside that house was something he had not anticipated, and that caught him completely off guard. The main room of the house was occupied by 5 women of varying ages, all of whom turned to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to hope to something that might have been calculation. Martha introduced the others quickly. There was Rachel, Martha's daughter, a woman of about 30 with a tired but pleasant face, and a young son named Timothy who peeked shyly from behind her skirts. There was Agnes, perhaps 45, who Martha explained was her widowed sister. There was Caroline, a young woman of maybe 22 or 23 with blonde hair and an open, friendly expression. And there was Louisa, somewhere in her mid-30s, quiet and reserved with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything carefully. Martha explained to Sam, as she directed him to sit at the table where food was already being prepared, that this household consisted of herself, her daughter Rachel and grandson Timothy, her sister Agnes, and 2 other women, Caroline and Louisa, who had come to live with them after finding themselves alone and vulnerable in circumstances where women without male protection faced considerable difficulty and danger. Martha explained that they worked this homestead cooperatively, pooling their labor and resources, managing to survive through combined effort but facing constant challenges because certain work required male strength, and because the community looked askance at women living without men, considering them fair game for exploitation or harassment. As Sam ate the hot food that was placed before him, food that tasted incredibly good after days of trail rations, the women talked among themselves and occasionally included him in conversation, asking about his journey and his ranch and his life. Sam, who was not accustomed to so much female company or to being the focus of attention, answered their questions briefly and politely, feeling increasingly aware that something unusual was happening, that these women were assessing him in some way he did not fully understand, that his arrival had set something in motion that went beyond simple hospitality to a passing traveler. After the meal, Martha told Sam that she needed to speak frankly with him about a matter of some importance, and she asked if he would hear her out before going to the barn for the night. Sam, full of good food and feeling the pull of exhaustion but also curious about what Martha wanted to discuss, agreed to listen. What Martha proposed then was something so unexpected that Sam at first thought he must have misunderstood her meaning. But as she continued speaking, and as the other women watched him with serious faces, he realized that she was entirely serious, and that what was being offered to him was both an opportunity and a complication unlike anything he had encountered before. Martha explained that the women of this household had been discussing their situation and had concluded that they needed to find a man who would be willing to join their household, to provide the male labor and protection they lacked, to help them build their homestead into something more secure and prosperous. She told Sam directly that they had been praying for Providence to send them someone suitable, someone honest and hardworking who might be willing to consider an unusual arrangement. She proposed that Sam could become part of their household, that he could bring his own ranch into a kind of partnership with their homestead, that together they could build something larger and more successful than any of them could manage alone. She made clear that she was not proposing marriage in the conventional sense, but rather a practical arrangement where Sam would have his own quarters, but would be considered the man of the household, responsible for heavy work and protection, while the women would handle domestic matters and lighter farm work. Sam sat in stunned silence as Martha laid out this proposal, his tired mind struggling to process what he was hearing. He had expected to sleep in a barn and leave in the morning, never to see these people again, but instead he was being offered something complex and strange, an arrangement that defied conventional ideas about how households should be organized. He told Martha honestly that he needed to think about this, that it was not a decision he could make in his current exhausted state, but that he would consider what she had said and would give her an answer in the morning. Sam went to the barn as planned, spreading his bedroll in the hayloft, but sleep did not come easily despite his exhaustion. His mind kept turning over Martha's proposal, examining it from every angle, trying to understand what would be involved and whether such an arrangement could possibly work. Part of him wanted to simply ride away in the morning and forget he had ever stopped at this place, to return to his solitary ranch and his solitary life without the complications that joining this household would bring. But another part of him, a part he had not fully acknowledged until that moment, recognized that he was lonely, that 8 years of living alone had worn on him more than he liked to admit, that the warmth and life in that house had reminded him of something he had been missing without quite knowing it. Sam thought about the practical aspects of Martha's proposal, trying to assess whether it made sense from a business perspective. His ranch was modestly successful, but limited by the amount of work one man could do alone. This homestead had labor but lacked male strength and expertise for certain essential tasks. Together, the two properties might indeed be able to support more livestock and grow more crops than either could manage separately, creating economies of scale that could benefit everyone involved. From a purely practical standpoint, the arrangement had merit, but Sam also had to consider the social implications of joining such an unusual household. Frontier communities were often judgmental about arrangements that deviated from conventional family structures, and living with 5 women without being married to any of them would certainly generate gossip and possibly hostility. Sam would be seen as either incredibly lucky or morally suspect, and the women would face even harsher judgment, accused of running an improper household or worse. The arrangement might work privately, but could create public problems that would affect everyone involved. Yet as Sam lay in that hayloft thinking about these considerations, he kept returning to the faces he had seen around that table, women who were trying to survive in circumstances that were stacked against them, who had found each other and formed a cooperative household, because they understood that alone they were vulnerable, but together they had a chance. He thought about Rachel with her young son, trying to raise a child without a father. He thought about Martha and Agnes, older women who should have been able to rest in their later years, but who instead had to work constantly to maintain their precarious security. He thought about Caroline and Louisa, young enough to have futures ahead of them but constrained by lack of options and resources. These were not scheming women trying to trap him, but rather people in genuine need trying to find a solution to real problems. Sam also had to confront his own situation honestly. He had told himself for years that he preferred solitude, that he was content with his isolated existence, but seeing that lively household had revealed the hollowness of that claim. He was lonely. He missed human connection and conversation and the simple presence of other people. He had been slowly becoming harder and more withdrawn, losing parts of himself that needed social interaction to remain fully human. Maybe, he thought, Martha's proposal was not just providence for them but also for him, an opportunity to build a different kind of life than the one he had been living. As dawn began to lighten the sky, Sam made his decision. He would accept Martha's proposal on a trial basis, would commit to staying for at least 6 months to see if the arrangement could work, would bring his skills and his labor to their household while maintaining ownership of his own ranch, so that if things did not work out, he could return to his previous life. It was a compromise between commitment and caution, a way of saying yes while also protecting himself and them from being trapped in a situation that proved unworkable. When Sam presented his decision to Martha and the other women over breakfast, he saw relief and joy flash across their faces, emotions quickly controlled but unmistakable. Martha accepted his terms immediately, agreeing that a trial period made sense and that both parties should have the ability to end the arrangement if it proved unsatisfactory. They spent the morning discussing practical details, working out how the household would function, what Sam's responsibilities would include, what resources he would contribute, and what he could expect in return. It was agreed that Sam would live in a small addition to the house that had served as storage, but that could be converted into private quarters, giving him his own space while also being part of the household. He would take primary responsibility for all heavy labor including fence mending, equipment repair, livestock management, and protection of the property and its inhabitants. The women would continue handling domestic work, gardening, lighter farm tasks, and managing the household economy. Financial matters would be discussed collectively, with Sam having significant input but not absolute control, recognizing that this was a partnership rather than a traditional patriarchal household. Sam spent that first day riding back to his ranch to collect essential tools and supplies, and to make arrangements for his cattle to be moved to the homestead, where they could be integrated with the small herd the women already maintained. Over the following weeks, Sam threw himself into the accumulated work that the homestead needed, repairing fences and buildings, organizing equipment, assessing what livestock they had and what could be added, essentially treating the property as he would his own ranch and bringing his expertise and labor to bear on problems that had been beyond the women's capacity to solve alone. The women, for their part, made good on their commitments, providing meals and clean clothes and an organized household that functioned smoothly, creating an environment that felt more like a home than anywhere Sam had lived since childhood. They also proved to be harder workers and more capable than Sam might have expected, handling heavy garden work and livestock feeding, and other tasks that many women would have considered beyond their scope, demonstrating that they had learned to do whatever was necessary for survival, even when it went against conventional ideas about women's limitations. As weeks turned into months, the household found its rhythm, with everyone settling into roles that played to their strengths. Martha proved to be an excellent overall manager, keeping everyone organized and ensuring that work was distributed fairly. Rachel was particularly skilled with poultry and dairy, managing the chickens and the milk cow with expertise that produced income from egg and butter sales. Agnes was a gifted gardener whose vegetable plots produced abundantly. Caroline had a talent for sewing and textile work, making and mending clothes and producing items that could be sold. Louisa, the quietest member of the household, proved to be highly intelligent and literate, handling all record-keeping and correspondence and reading aloud in the evenings from books and newspapers, providing education and entertainment for everyone. Sam found himself surprised by how quickly he adapted to this unusual household, how natural it began to feel to have these women as his partners and companions, how much richer his life became with conversation and laughter and the simple presence of other people. He discovered that he enjoyed teaching Timothy about ranch work, giving the boy the kind of mentorship he had received from his uncle. He found himself looking forward to evenings when the household would gather, and Louisa would read or Caroline would play a small harmonium she owned, or everyone would simply talk about their days and their observations and their hopes for the future. As word spread through the surrounding community about the unusual household arrangement, reactions ranged from curiosity to disapproval to outright hostility. Some neighbors were scandalized by the idea of a man living with 5 women without being married to any of them, considering the arrangement immoral regardless of how innocent the actual relationships might be. Others were simply suspicious, unable to understand why anyone would choose such an unconventional living situation unless something improper was going on. A few people, generally those who knew the women or who had more flexible attitudes about frontier survival, were supportive or at least willing to reserve judgment and see if the arrangement proved workable. The women of the household faced the harshest judgment, with whispered comments and pointed snubs when they went to town, with gossip that suggested they were running a brothel, or that Sam was taking advantage of their vulnerable situation, or various other uncharitable interpretations of their living arrangement. Sam himself faced mockery and crude jokes from some men who assumed he was living in some kind of fantasy with 5 women at his disposal, completely misunderstanding the nature of the household and reducing it to base assumptions about male desires and female availability. Sam dealt with this gossip and judgment by largely ignoring it, refusing to engage with speculation or to defend himself against accusations he considered beneath response. His approach was to let his actions speak for themselves, to demonstrate through consistent behavior that he was a decent man engaged in a practical partnership, to show that the household was prosperous and well-run and beneficial to everyone involved. When men made crude comments, Sam would respond with cold silence or with a look that suggested they should reconsider their words before continuing. When women whispered about the household, the 5 women would hold their heads high and go about their business with dignity, refusing to be shamed for choices they had made out of necessity and that were harming no one. The true test of the household's acceptance came during a particularly harsh winter about 8 months after Sam had joined them, when a series of blizzards struck the region and several families found themselves in desperate situations, trapped by snow and running low on food and fuel. Sam and the women opened their household to neighbors in need, providing shelter and meals and supplies to people who otherwise might have died, demonstrating that their unconventional arrangement had not made them less charitable or less valuable to the community, but rather had made them stronger and more capable of helping others. This generosity during crisis began to shift community opinion, with even some former critics acknowledging that the household was contributing positively to the region, and that perhaps the arrangement was not as scandalous as it had initially appeared. Parents whose children Sam had helped began to greet him more warmly. Families who had received assistance from the women during winter's worst days became defenders rather than critics. Gradually, the household moved from being seen as suspicious to being accepted as unusual but respectable, an arrangement that defied convention but that clearly worked, and that harmed no one while benefiting many. As the months of Sam's trial period extended into years, and as the trial basis of the arrangement was quietly forgotten in favor of permanent partnership, the relationships within the household deepened and became more complex than any of them had initially anticipated. Sam found himself forming genuine friendships with each of the women, relationships that went beyond practical partnership into real affection and mutual respect. Martha became like a mother to him, someone whose wisdom he valued and whose approval he sought. Agnes proved to have a dry wit that matched Sam's own humor, leading to many evenings of laughter over shared observations about life's absurdities. Caroline's optimism and energy lifted everyone's spirits during difficult times. Rachel's strength and competence earned Sam's deep respect, and he took pride in being a positive male influence for young Timothy. But it was with Louisa that Sam formed the deepest and most complicated connection, a relationship that surprised both of them with its intensity, and that gradually evolved from friendship into something that felt like love, though neither quite knew how to navigate such feelings within the context of their unusual household. Louisa had been the most reserved member of the household initially, the one who shared least about her past or her feelings, but as she came to trust Sam, she revealed a depth of intelligence and sensitivity that captivated him. They would talk for hours about books and ideas and observations about human nature, conversations that stimulated Sam intellectually in ways he had never experienced before. The relationship between Sam and Louisa remained scrupulously proper in terms of physical boundaries, because both understood that any impropriety would damage not just themselves, but the entire household, would give critics the evidence they needed to condemn the arrangement as immoral. But emotionally and intellectually, they were clearly moving toward a partnership that transcended friendship. And the other women noticed this development and quietly encouraged it, recognizing that if Sam and Louisa married, it would actually strengthen the household by providing conventional legitimacy while not changing the fundamental dynamics that had proven successful. Eventually, after nearly 3 years of living in the household, Sam asked Louisa to marry him in a formal proposal that acknowledged the unusual circumstances, but that expressed genuine love and commitment. Louisa accepted, and their wedding became a community event that marked the household's full acceptance into respectable society, proof that the unconventional arrangement had ultimately led to a conventional outcome that no one could criticize. The marriage changed some aspects of the household, but preserved most of the essential dynamics, with Sam and Louisa moving into slightly larger quarters, but the cooperative partnership among all 6 adults continuing as it had before. Over the following years, Sam and Louisa had 3 children who grew up in this extended household, where they were loved and taught by multiple adults, where they learned that family could be defined by choice and commitment rather than just by blood, where they saw that unconventional arrangements could work beautifully when built on mutual respect and genuine care. The other women remained part of the household, contributing their labor and their wisdom, forming a chosen family that thrived precisely because it defied conventional expectations while honoring fundamental values of loyalty and cooperation. As decades passed, and as the original members of the household aged and eventually died, the story of how that household had been formed became a legend in the region, told as an example of how necessity and opportunity can combine to create something unexpected and valuable. The tale of the rancher who had stopped seeking only a place to sleep, but who had found instead a family and a future became a parable about keeping an open mind to possibilities, about how the best things in life often come from saying yes to situations that seem complicated or uncertain. Sam McKenna lived to be 73, dying peacefully in the house he had joined so many years earlier, surrounded by the family he had found there. His legacy being not just the prosperous ranch he had helped build, but the model he had provided of a man who was strong enough to defy convention when convention did not serve justice or human flourishing. The household he had helped create continued for many years after his death, with younger generations maintaining the spirit of cooperative partnership, even as the specific arrangements evolved to fit changing circumstances. In the untamed landscape of frontier Colorado, where survival required flexibility, and where rigid adherence to convention could mean death or failure, the story of Sam McKenna and the 5 women who changed his life stands as powerful testimony to the creative solutions that emerge when people are willing to look beyond traditional structures to find what actually works. Sam McKenna had sought nothing more than a barn to sleep in for one night, had expected to continue his solitary journey unchanged by a brief encounter with strangers, but instead had walked into a situation that would transform his entire existence, and that would prove that sometimes life's richest blessings come in forms we never anticipated. The 5 women of that household had recognized in Sam's arrival an answer to prayers they had been speaking, had seen in this exhausted stranger an opportunity to solve problems that threatened their survival, had been bold enough to propose an arrangement that defied convention, because they understood that survival sometimes requires innovation rather than conformity. Their courage in making that proposal and their wisdom in creating a household structure that could actually work demonstrated that women's thinking and planning could be as strategic and effective as any man's, that gender roles were more flexible than society pretended, and that practical cooperation often mattered more than romantic ideals. Together, Sam and the women created something that skeptics had said would fail, but that proved remarkably successful. A chosen family built on clear agreements and mutual respect. A partnership that delivered benefits to everyone involved while harming no one. An arrangement that eventually earned community acceptance precisely because it worked so well and contributed so positively to the region. Their story reminds us that the structures through which we organize our lives need not conform to rigid templates, that family can be defined by choice and commitment rather than just by blood and legal ties, that the best solutions to difficult problems often emerge from thinking creatively rather than traditionally. The wild frontier was indeed a place that tested everyone who lived there, but it was also a place where new possibilities could be explored, where people could escape the rigid expectations of more settled society, where unconventional arrangements could be attempted and refined and proven successful. Sam McKenna's story demonstrates that keeping an open mind to unexpected opportunities can lead to the richest rewards, that saying yes to complications can sometimes be wiser than maintaining simplicity, that seeking only a place to sleep for one night can lead to finding a home that lasts a lifetime. Their legacy lives on in the enduring truth that human flourishing comes in many forms, that love and commitment can be expressed through various structures, and that sometimes the people who claim they want nothing more than simple shelter are actually seeking, whether they know it or not, the complex richness of genuine community and connection, waiting only for the right opportunity to reveal that deeper need, and to embrace the answer when it arrives in unexpected form.